Redditors who grew up filthy rich, what did you think was normal till you learned otherwise? Honestly, it was the little things. I knew we had nicer cars than average, a bigger house, went on more trips, etc. But I thought everyone's refrigerators had wood paneled cabinet doors. For example, we had a Sub-Zero built-in refrigerator and freezer. The first time I saw a metal fridge I thought it was weird, and I thought it was even weirder that the fridge and freezer were combined. But then I got really jealous because you could put magnets on it. I also thought everyone had a central vacuum system where you can sweep dirt into a little hole under the cabinets by the floor and it sucks it up. We had these little holes all over, in every room. Stuff like that. Probably a weird example, but growing up all of our dishes were made of fine china, Waterford glassware, etc. And I just thought that's what plates and stuff were made of because we didn't have anything else. Then one time I went to a friend's house for dinner and we ate on colored plastic plates and non-matching plastic cups. I just thought that was the weirdest thing ever and asked why we were eating with camping dishes. I myself am not rich, but I have an uncle who is very well off. So one of my not rich aunts was complaining about her car acting up on her. Well, my cousin from the rich family was listening and got really confused. So he just asked her, well, why don't you just get rid of it and go buy another one? This kid was probably 13 or so at the time and had no concept of not enough money. He couldn't understand why you wouldn't just go get a new something if your old something didn't work. I thought everyone got to eat dinner quite often with the president. I always thought the president has dinner at random houses until I learned otherwise when I finally joined regular school. I was homeschooled till I was age 9, and no kid believed my dinner story. Dad was ambassador of Kenya to Saudi Arabia. Kidnapping. Whenever we traveled there were guards. I was trained in what to do if it happened. We had insurance policies against it. When I dated a middle-class suburbanite and talked about it, she thought I was paranoid, but that was a thing. I remember my parents having a sit-down talk with me after a parent-teacher meeting and letting me know that there was one student in our class that was feeling insecure because his family was the only one that didn't have a lake cottage or mountain home. Ah yes, the best way to help a child get over his insecurities. Tell the rest of the children in his class about them. My parents paid in full for my $60,000 of college tuition. I was always grateful for that, but it wasn't until the post-grad reality of my friends working to pay off their student loan debt while I was able to directly pursue my professional goals that I truly realized the advantage that I had from my parents' wealth. I had always known we were well off, but it wasn't until after college that I truly appreciated that, I guess. I hope I can pay them back for that someday. I would say rich in the area. By comparison, I think the moment it really sunk in was during 5/6th grade, around middle school. I felt like I was getting too cool for little kid parties, so I decided I wanted to go somewhere and do something fun. My parents were super excited about this since it meant I was taking one stupid middle schooler with us on a mini trip instead of having 15 stupid middle schoolers in the house. I decided on a trip to some festival, which meant a ferry ride and then drive to a Canadian city and have a big fancy meal. The girl I picked had been my friend for years. I had no idea her life was so different. She lost her mind on the ferry. It was so fun. She had never seen Canada before, so we stopped and took her picture. My parents, realizing immediately that it was a huge deal for this girl, bought her and I souvenirs, which she later gave to her mom since her mom has never left the area. My mom would not let her order the cheapest thing on the menu, which I never realized is something poor children are trained to do. I thought you could just pick whatever you wanted to eat. She was the first person in her family to travel more than 30 miles from her house. This was pre-9/11 when a family could just take a random child with no ID and a permission slip from their parent into another country. We are both adults now and occasionally run into each other. She is married with 4 children and still talks about the time we rode a ferry and went to Canada. Had she not brought it up, I probably would have forgotten. My mom used to take us to the mall and drop $500 in a day without thinking about it. Budgeting in general was a foreign concept until I racked up credit card debt that I couldn't pay off immediately. I was pretty poor as a kid but lived in a wealthy city, so most of my friends were quite well off. One time my friend's dad took us to a comic book convention and he bought me a $25 book just because I was looking at it and seemed to like it. It absolutely boggled my mind that someone would spend $25 on me for no occasion and without agonizing over the decision. I spent my late teens and early 20s butlering for a very wealthy, not billionaires but not far off, family. They had 2 school-age kids that I would drop off in the morning. The older, 7 maybe 8 the time of the 2 was amazed to learn that I didn't have a holiday home to go to when I took time off. I feel bad having said this while joining a friend on a road trip up into the mountains at his brother's house. There was slow as balls internet at the house we were going to and the connection dropped frequently. I didn't have my car with me since I was on a road trip with someone else at the time. This was also before personal Wi-Fi was a thing. And my cell phone at the time was a state-of-the-art brick phone from Nokia, thus no hotspot. Me. If there's any way I could borrow a car to hop into town for internet tomorrow, that would be awesome. Friend, well, my brother uses his car every day and I'm using mine to go to that event we talked about. Me. That's fine. Is it okay if I just use his extra car? Awkward silence. Until, friend, he just has that one car. LOL. I drove a crappy 96 Taurus in high school. One day I drove my friends into town. A well-off girl drove a new BMW I didn't know very well came along. When we got out of the car, she asked me if my car locks, like she thought it was so crappy it didn't come with a lock. Growing up I thought apartment buildings were only for college students. I didn't know families lived in them. My family was not filthy rich. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, not out in the country. My friend in high school was filthy rich, and he would always wear suit jackets and fedoras. One day he said I wanted to wear my other purple suit, but the jacket was at my third house. It was some Gatsby level extravagance. Your friend was a solid argument that money can't buy good taste. Going on ski holiday every year. Living in Germany, where the Alps are just a 2 hours drive away, but still flying to Western Canada for skiing at Whistler Mountain. But I like this snow. I was trying to show a friend of mine that she's rich because her family has a team of maids and drivers. Seriously, a driver for every member of the family. She said she's not rich because everyone has maids and drivers. I asked her, do you think your maids and drivers have maids and drivers? I think then it clicked that she might be rich. John Travolta told a cute story about his daughter once. They had to fly commercial once and she was shocked, incredulous, and asked, Daddy, who are all these people on our plane? She thought everyone had their own 757. To never discuss the affordability of things within a family. I thought it was totally taboo, which isn't to say I got everything I wanted growing up. I was an obsessively frugal kid, but I was never denied something on the basis of we can't afford that. I was pretty shocked in elementary school when my friend's mom told her they couldn't afford to buy something. I guess in my mind it was impolite for parents to talk about money issues with kids, and it hadn't yet dawned on me that sometimes that's unavoidable. Maybe the point where it gets a bit stranger is when things like affordability weren't even discussed when picking out colleges and living accommodations. Fortunately, I got to go to a great school for pretty much free, but I'm pretty sure they'd have put me through NYU and med school if I'd asked. It was also interesting going apartment shopping with friends that were all still financially dependent on parents but were definitely having what can we afford conversations in ways that just weren't coming up in my family. I lived overseas for a year when I was in high school and attended an international school where, though my family was decidedly middle class in the US and my dad was being paid several times more to work abroad than he had been at home, I'm fairly certain my family were the least well off in the entire school. None of these kids ever seemed to realize how fabulously wealthy they were. A few examples. Several boys from North Korea. I don't know exactly how high up in the political world of the DPRK you need to be allowed to send your children abroad for an education, but these kids showed up to school in brand new Benzes. For a start, one friend of mine lived in a luxury high-rise in the single richest enclave of the city where I lived. His parents lived on the 16th floor. Each floor was a single unit. He lived on the 17th floor in his own unit. He had his own live-in maid and driver as well. Another friend's parents ran the largest import-export company in the country. He had 2 bodyguards, and was driven around in his own armored, bulletproof SUV. The windows were 2 inches thick and didn't roll down. I attended his birthday party, which was on his dad's 180 feet super yacht. It was not uncommon for my friends to spend 3-day weekends in Bali, the Maldives, or wherever their vacation home happened to be. I'm still friends with several of them through social media, and the most frequent post I see from several of them is after for the week, then on to and those locations almost always being on 3 separate continents. My family was broke as heck, but my mom was, and still is, a teacher at this really nice private school, which was the only reason my brother and I could attend. Everyone's parents were doctors and lawyers. You get the idea. But why brother and I were being raised by a single mom who had just relocated. We were living in a trailer park in the middle of nowhere for the cheap butt rent. We didn't always know when the next meal was coming. One day, during lunch, the kids notice that all I have is a peanut butter sandwich and a tiny bag of pretzels. One dude says, "Wow, you must really not be hungry." Since I was 6 and just as clueless to any other lifestyle as he was, I just straight up told him we don't have any more food. I had to explain it a couple of times before he realized. Lunch bro sheepishly asks if I would like some of his food. That orange and baggie of Cheetos were the start of a now 20-year-long friendship. I thought until the start of high school that a $100 bottle of wine was cheap. Expensive ones rise several thousands after all. At the end of the year we decided to offer our retiring teacher a bottle of wine and he said, "Don't buy a $100 bottle." I made a joke about how picky he was and made a fool of myself. Reminds me of the movie Meet the Parents, where the guy goes to the local grocery and tries to get some good champagne to impress his in-laws. All they had was mum. When he mentions to the cashier that he was looking for something more expensive, "Well, you could get a whole bunch of mums," is the reply. My 8-year-old came home from school last year and told me that not everyone had a tennis court. In fact, he said, nobody but he had a tennis court in his class. He was amazed that other kids played in the street instead of their own tennis court. The tennis court is old and crappy, but it makes a great play area, paved, and with a 10-foot fence around it. I have many kids who have many friends. It's nice to have a pen to keep them in during parties. I think the term you're looking for is prison yard, not tennis court. This girl I knew was rejected from a law school because her diversity statement was written about her struggle of riding commercial to Europe for the first time. I was poor growing up, and most of my friends were poor middle class. There was this one dude who drove a crappy, falling apart beta car. He was always hustling to and from work, trying to make a buck to afford repairs for his car. We all thought he was lucky just to have a car. One night, after we had been friends for a while, he invited a bunch of us over to his house. Even offered to pick us all up, since no one else had our own wheels. Imagine our surprise when we rolled up into the ritziest neighborhood in our area. Dude lived in a freaking mansion, indoor pool, elevator, the whole 9 yards. We were flummoxed. Someone said, "Dude, we had no idea you were rich." His answer, "I'm not rich, my parents are. They worked very hard to get that way." At first we felt bad for him. Freaking filthy rich parents, and dude is working his butt off to afford a beta. Now I get it though. Just wanted to point out, I grew up in a major East Coast city with a good, though sometimes annoying, public transportation network. Having a car wasn't a necessity by any stretch, but it did make life a bit easier. Having a car at 17 of any sort was definitely impressive in my circle. It was one of the outer boroughs of NYC. Interesting to know so many other cities have annoying public transportation. Through the entirety of elementary school I would buy ice cream for my class on Fridays at lunch. The money came from flipping Pokemon cards, paper jewelry, and of course, mostly from my dear old dad. It doesn't seem like much, but we all came from a very poor rural town with one store and one school. Our playground at school was a stretch of coarse pavement. It was like the 60s and the 90s. My dad had just started up his own machine shop in town which employed 10 or so. My slight business sense as a kid coupled with my dad's business sense made us rich. Everyone would call us boss man, which is probably where I began realizing that being a boss man wasn't the norm. My dad taught me a lesson after he realized I was spending all my money on the other kids. If you want to make a lasting impression, Let's really give something back and fix up that old playground. My dad's machine shop then produced and installed an entire playground system for our school at no cost. It was that day I knew what it meant to be a good man and that I wanted to be just like my dad. What's funny is that I wanted to be absolutely nothing like him once I hit the teenage years. Now, I'm a grown man and a splitting image of my dad in the flesh as well as in character. I appear to have gone off on a tangent. I'll stop the story here. My dad gets a stonewall look on his face as if his soul is squirming when people are more than gratuitous to him. I guess it makes him uncomfortable or he's just unusually modest. He's always been the you would have done the same, a handshake. And that's that kind of guy. I want to show him this thread but I know he'll tear up and then I will too and then it's all aboard the crybaby train. I can't believe this turned out as big as it has. I'm glad I could tell you all a little about my dad and I. Thanks for reading and have a great day wherever you may be. That was really cool of your dad and his company to do that, and sounds like you learned the lesson he was going for. When I found out my dad paid off a multi-million-dollar mortgage in less than 5 years, that's when I knew one was not like the others. I grew up dirt poor and, when I met my husband, was dirt poor myself. He came from an upper middle class family where everyone got college paid and they always had new things. My husband has never been unemployed and doesn't understand how someone can be unemployed. I remind him all of the time that when he met me, I was unemployed. Yeah, but you just had some crappy things happen to you. That's all. Yeah, honey, that's how it works. Complaints about airport security. We never got around to owning a plane, but most of our family friends who we would vacation with would share theirs with us. Basically you show up at the local airport and hop right on. If we ever took a commercial jet, we had a prepaid TSA pre-check that let us zip through our own security line. I never understood why people would say they planned on heading to the airport 2 hours before their flight. We never got around to owning a plane. Sorry, peasant. This thread is reserved for the filthy rich only. Flip side. Growing up in the projects, I thought that people that lived in trailer parks were rich because they had their own house among many other odd beliefs. My mom never worked. Instead she stayed at home and raised each one of her 4 sons in succession. So there was a point when I was shocked to learn that other kids' moms had jobs and didn't just play them, watch them, take them on excursions every day. Obligatory. We were never rich but I feel like this qualifies. Also mom got her masters and had to go back to work so that we could pay the mortgage and have health insurance once dad's business took a crap at the beginning of the recession. My boyfriend's family was pretty poor compared to mine, so when we discuss our childhoods we notice some pretty glaring differences. For example, he was telling me recently about how they would leave the kitchen stove on and open in his house for the heat in winter. No central heating air, something I completely took for granted as a kid. I think people start with not filthy rich because everyone looks up and sees people with more money than them. Rich and poor will always be relative. So I can't help but start with saying that while my parents aren't filthy rich, it never occurred to me that it wasn't that normal to have a fully owned house without any mortgage. I thought renting was something only people in their 20s had to do. I thought doctors and lawyers lived in the poor part of town. You know, the guard-gated communities with golf courses in them. I don't think I realized they weren't poor until I got to college. Whoa, this reminds me of when I used to live in Santa Barbara. We were dirt poor college students living in heavily subsidized campus housing, and I had a conversation with a man in his mid-60s who told me he really wanted to retire but he couldn't find anyone to take over his job because nobody in his line of work could afford to live in our area. Dude was a pediatric surgeon. I wasn't the one who was filthy rich, but I went to a fancy private school from 9th grade to 12th grade on scholarship. There were tons of kids there who didn't know exactly how rich they were. I remember one girl complaining about how her parents were buying a third house in Florida but that it cost $1 million less than her main home, which was around $4-6 million. I have so many stories where the rich kids from my school didn't realize just how rich they were. It was pretty sad. Only middle class, but I realized I was globally rich when in the Marines. Filipino folks were taking out trash to fix their roofs. Now I am internetally rich too. I remember going to India and giving about 10 rupees, roughly 10 pence or 15 cents, to a homeless woman. She was basically in tears. It's as if I saved her life or something. That was a big wake-up call. When my stepdad started college, he went out to dinner with his friends. When they got their bill and were getting ready to leave, he was really confused. He had never had a one-course meal. He was under the impression the next 3 would be coming any moment. Discovering that other people's parents didn't have 100+ properties in their investment portfolio. We had quite a frugal lifestyle, so I just assumed that most middle class had a few investment properties and that's where all the money went. My mom was really into fashion, so I used to get rid of old clothes pretty much every season and have new clothes almost constantly. I realized this wasn't normal around middle school and high school when people talked about having their clothes for years at a time. Old habits are hard to break, but I shop a lot less than she did. At least we gave the old clothes to Goodwill. Watching Sports Center reruns all morning in college and complaining I was bored. A poor kid finally schooled me on the fact everyone else had to work to put themselves through college and become indentured servants to pay off their student loans. Oh wow, still not getting a job though. Serious question. What kinds of jobs or circumstances allow people to make millions of dollars per year besides some CS and some stock investors? We weren't insanely rich, but upper middle class. I never realized that other kids didn't get to travel as much as we did. By the time I graduated high school I had been to 10 countries and countless states. Now as an adult working 2 jobs to keep my head above water, I'm grateful for how lucky I really was. This wasn't me, but a filthy rich friend didn't know that filet mignon beef tacos was not the norm. I grew up in a foreign country where, by comparison, we were rich. Coming back to the US as a young kid I learned pretty quickly having house staff was not the norm. I stopped mentioning those things in conversations with other kids. We had a houseboy. I mean, what position is that even? I grew up pretty isolated, so I didn't realize that there were smart poor people who just weren't told they were smart every day of their lives. It never occurred to me that people could be smart and not praised for it. My family used to be pretty rich when I was really young. Never had to look at prices when shopping. Not anymore though. Everything is embroidered to a certain point. From zebras to toasters. Everything appears to be embroidered when you don't know any better. I can't think of any reason why, but the patterns in the air just really mess with your perception. See, when you're rich and have all this extra money, there isn't any reason to not get personalized everything. So everything else seems like it was embroidered by someone or something. Getting best medical care and $100 allowance every week. I got paid more by my dad than I did with my first job. I had a friend whose dad managed a bunch of Budweiser factories and she sent me a picture of her new car, which was a Lamborghini. I sent her a picture of my 1993 Honda Del Sol and she then realized she was rich. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.